Welcome to Public Safety Talk Radio, the podcast for all of our heroes in public safety, including law enforcement professionals, firefighters, EMTs, corrections officers, healthcare workers, and more. This show is produced by the POCUA and is founded upon its Soundness initiative. This episode is sponsored by Police Mortgage. Police Mortgage is a full-service mortgage company dedicated to serving police officers and first responders. Founded in 2008, Police Mortgage offers a variety of mortgage products tailored to meet the needs of those who serve and protect. Police Mortgage, for first responders who are second to none. I am Ken Bader, your host for Public Safety Talk Radio, and I have another very intriguing guest. His name is Lon Bartel. I see on the screen here he goes by Bart. Lon Bartel. He is a principal researcher and curriculum developer for Vertra that does some great simulation training. We're definitely going to get into that. Lon has a 20-year history in law enforcement. He is an expert on human performance. He has a master's degree from Chicago, from the Concordia University of Chicago, which impresses me that it's from Chicago because that's where I'm from. But I've got my master's from DePaul University, so we'll have to talk about that. He's also getting his doctorate in philosophy. Maybe we'll get to that. But Lon, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, man. Glad to be here.
Hey, glad to have you. Glad to have you. Yeah, before we even get into the simulation and the human performance, I really want to dig into that. Can you give our audience just a little bit of a background in that 20-year law enforcement career that you had?
Yeah, so my time as a law enforcement officer, I absolutely loved the career. I love the people and I love the work. You know how it is, like everybody else. I didn't necessarily love the politics. But I did everything from, started like everybody else, working graveyards and patrol to one of my favorite units was the bike unit. Back when marijuana was still illegal, rolling up to somebody in a park in the middle of the night and pulling a joint right out of their hands as they go look at you and go, "Oh, hell, you're the cops." Something about that was a blast. I was on our SWAT team. I'm actually one of the founding members of the state's Tactical Officers Association.
Wow.
The Arizona Tactical Officers Association. I'm one of their founding members, and I served as a secretary for about 5 years on that. On the SWAT team, I was our explosive breacher. Well, I was our tactical breacher, but I started our explosive breach program, and I helped other agencies start their program. I still believe to this day that there is no problem that is so insurmountable that the proper application of high explosives can't fix it. So it's one of those things. And then I was our range master. So I ran our range master, our firearms program, but I also, because of my education, my training, I was a subject matter expert for the state of Arizona in firearms, as well as defensive tactics, taser master instructor. So I ran all of the hands-on, high-profile, high-liability stuff, except driving. I'm already running taser, and I'm going to get named as the instructor on the lawsuit. I'm already doing DT and arrest control. I'm going to get named as the instructor of the lawsuit. Firearms, SWAT. I didn't want driving, so anything else pretty much was under my purview. And then so I ran a bunch of teams. And I ran teams as an officer, so my leadership in that regard was I was running those teams as a quote unquote line level officer, but I had sergeants and lieutenants that worked for me when they were functioning in an instructional capacity. And I was also really heavy into the police associations. I started as a rep, sergeant at arms, vice president, and then president. I was president for a long time. So when I talk about the politics, I know very well the politics in law enforcement within, multiple areas of the city government. So it is what it is. So that's kind of an overview of the stuff that I did. Hostage negotiator, did that for a long time. I was an explorer advisor, and really getting a chance to work with the explorer programs. I enjoyed that. We did as the bike unit stuff. I was part of what we call the community oriented policing team.
Nice.
So I got to do a lot of really great stuff within the community to to not deal with just the symptoms, but actually go in and start fixing problems. So like we did criminal abatements, we did large scale, cleanups, really worked to galvanize the community, to make the communities better, and realize that, hey, we can work with you to make things better for you, but we need your help. So I'm a big believer in community-oriented policing and the way it was meant to be, which is, a partnership, a strategic partnership. But yeah, so I can't complain, man. I really enjoyed what I did.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds like it. And growing up and living most of my life in Chicago and now living for a decade and a half in Los Angeles County, I wouldn't know anything about politics and how that hinders law enforcement in any way, shape, or
Uh,
form.
right. No
I
kidding.
I think the most important question that came into my mind as you were speaking is you said something to the effect that there's no problem that couldn't be solved, something of the
With
effect
high
like with
explosives.
high explosives. So as you get your doctorate, are you going to go into marriage counseling?
Yeah, right now. So my doctor is actually in performance psychology. So it's a doctor of
Mhm,
philosophy, but it's psychology with a performance psychology base. I do a lot of expert witness stuff, and everything I factor in when it comes to one of my pet peeves has been for a long time. Everything I factor in from a training perspective is the human component to it
mhm,
and the actual human performance dynamics. And my issue has been for a couple of decades that we don't really take into account the human performance factors in a training environment. We just think that this training that has been passed on from, you know, person to person to person actually makes an impact and gives us the performance that we need. When I know, unfortunately, based on the science of sports performance, that we do a horrible job
mhm,
training cops in what I call what's called psychomotor skills, which is the actual physical skills that have to be executed within the construct of some type of moral, ethical, or legal framework, which is use of force. And we don't we train the exact wrong way. Unfortunately, I had a chance to. I was walking back from one of the force science courses. There's a Dr. Tim Lee. Tim Lee wrote a book that when I was an undergrad, I used like third edition, right? So him and Dr. Richard Smith and Tim Lee wrote this book, and I was talking to Tim Lee, and this is a guy that when I was an undergrad was literally one of my heroes, one of my idols, and he was talking about the fact that he's studying golf right now. It's been his thing for a while, but people have spent so much money, so much time, and nobody's score is getting better in the last
yeah.
30 years. And he did a parallel. He explained the parallel between law enforcement. He goes, look, we've done the exact same training, the exact same methodologies. We think we're more advanced, but we've done it the same way for so long, and we expect different outcomes. There's a reason why law enforcement officers are not performing the way we want them to, in some of these environments. Now, there's also some limits, right? There's some aspects that, hey, you're human, and I can't expect you to go beyond what a human can perform, what a human can see, react, respond, process, those kind of things. But if we want better performance, exceptional performance, then we better provide exceptional training.
Mhm.
And we're not seeing that. I just did an article. It got released the other day in Police One on what's called a constraint-led approach to training, and I've had a lot of impact, a lot of feedback on that. I've had people reach out to me and have a get a chance to talk, but it's those type of changes in training methodology. Everybody focuses on we got to do more training, and I
Mhm.
go, how about you just make sure the time you have actually has efficacy?
Right.
Because what we see is I'll talk a lot about, or I've talked a lot about what's called block and silo training, or block training specifically. And that's what most of us were so used to. When I went to the academy, that's what I saw, right? You standing in the line, draw, fire 2 rounds, bang, bang, draw, fire 2 rounds, bang, bang. And I'm like, yeah, this isn't a gunfight. I mean, there's you have nothing in the environment that sets up the environment that I'm going to have to function in. The task that you're asking me to do is not what I would actually have to contend with in a live lethal engagement, because you've got me literally planting my feet or they'll do the silly range dance. Everybody take a step left or take a step right. And I'm like, okay, but that's a procedural. How about the concept of the decision-making
Mm-hmm.
process? And that's not included in it. So those are all pet peeve issues of mine, but that's where my human performance background's been, right? It's like
Yeah.
my undergrad was, human physiology biochem. My master's degree was specifically in performance enhancement. And then, like I said, my PhD, I'm working on performance psychology, and I'm actually looking at the utilization of virtual reality training as a training methodology right now is my dissertation topic. So
Nice.
I enjoy it, and I think it's going to make some. We have the opportunity to make the impact, but people have got to be willing to do stuff differently than what we've done for the last 30 to 40 years.
Are you looking for a podcast to answer some financial questions? Well, then check out the Mortgage Beat podcast, brought to you by Police Mortgage, for first responders who are second to none. Mortgage Beat gives insight into the home loan process specifically for police officers, firefighters, and other public safety professionals. The podcast is hosted by Police Mortgage CEO John Aritos, who has decades of experience in the mortgage industry. Check out Mortgage Beat on Spotify today.
As you were speaking, I grabbed my phone not to text all my friends because I wasn't listening to you, but I was trying to remember the name of another company that we had the pleasure of having on Public Safety Talk Radio. They're called Pro Team Tactical Performance out of Indiana. And it's run by two former athletes that work with first responders, especially those that have gotten hurt and need PT and other things to get back on the job. And their thinking is, okay, we're giving all of this help to athletes, a football player, a baseball player, when they get hurt, and and for a cop, we're giving you three visits to the doctor, which doesn't make any sense. And it's the same thing, with the training. I mean, for the love of God, as we're speaking right now, there's, it's late April in 2024. And football season isn't coming for months, but there are teams that are bringing in players for OTAs. I
Right.
mean, months and months before the
Right.
season even starts. So, you need to, for a profession like police officer, which in my mind, if it isn't already, needs to be at the level of doctor, lawyer, nurse, anybody else that is architect, anybody else that is really, really skilled, that you're not a garbage man, working for the city. You're a professional, and you need the training beforehand that is at that same level. So yeah, let's get into one thing. In reading the virtual website and looking at a lot of your background, one of the things that really came to mind is both you and Virtra talk about a holistic approach to fast, accurate decision making and response. Yeah,
Yep.
that sounds great, but what exactly does that look like?
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to kind of what I talked about on the constraint-led approach, right? So holistic means let's look at every factor. What is the human capable of in the best environments? What are they capable in the worst environments? And then what is the task? The task complexity will absolutely play into what response somebody has. We have to evaluate the task, and then finally the environment. So those three components, task, environment, and the participant or the player, are always interacting, right? They're always constantly interacting. If the player does something, it changes, and they do something by engaging in the task. The moment they do that, the environment changes. Some constraint, some evaluative perspective, an angle, a position, or whatever, the environment changes. So a lot of us, when we talk about like the concept of Boyd's OODA loop, right? Observe, orient, decide, and act. It's very similar in that structure, in that I will affect the environment affects me and the task that I have to engage in. So you have to look at all of those components. If you're not looking at all of them, if all you're doing is looking at a single component, well, then you're missing a lot. So I jokingly talked about the, stand and draw and fire 2 rounds. So here's where the holistic component, let's change it up. Let's take law enforcement out of it. I'm a tennis coach. All right. Something simple. We've all played tennis. We played it in high school. Is what it is. So if I'm trying to teach somebody how to do a return on a serve, if all I do is hand them a forehand return, in other words, I place the ball about 4 to 7 feet in front of them off to their primary side. The first time I send the ball their way, they're probably going to miss it. They're going to hit it at a weird angle, whatever. It'll hook to the right or hook left or do something funky. But then they'll send another one. And then all of a sudden I'll start to get the timing out. And then I'll get another one sent me. And all of a sudden I get, now eventually after about the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth one, I'm getting better and better and better in that environment, which is I'm stationary. You're giving me the serve. I'm getting better. The problem of it is, here's all the things I've eliminated. I've eliminated the need for me as the participant to watch the person serving it, who will be eventually the other player, to watch their body language, to read their body language, to read the angle on the racket, to read their elbow, their shoulder, to all of those things. I'm eliminating the need to know where I should pay attention, how to interpret that information, and how to make it, what decision to make. I already know the decision. I already know the ball's coming. I know how it's coming. I don't need to make a decision on what return I need. I know I'm doing a forehand return, right? But in a game, in a competitive environment, it might be a forehand return. It might be a backhand return. It could be overhand. I have decisions that I have to make. Go back to the range. Draw, fire 2 rounds. I don't have to worry about where I pay attention. I don't have to worry about how to evaluate that information. And I don't have to make a decision. All I do is carry out the answer to a solution that I've already solved. That's not what happens to cops. We don't spend enough time in watching the other players, and I'll say it that way, and understanding the game, the game dynamic. So, you joked around and talk about, football and whatnot. Football players watch the other team. Boxers watch the other guy. Why? I want to know what you do, what you move, how to interpret this. When you do this, you do, somebody else does that. Those are the things that we don't spend we spend almost no time on, right? We don't take great video and dissect it and go, okay, let's look at how the threat evolves. What's the angle on the shoulder? What's the angle on the elbow? What is this person doing? Are there any indications that this person's a cognitive aggressor? Are there any indications, that this person is doing something? We don't do any of that. We will spend hours on the range, draw, fire 2 rounds, but we don't do anything when it comes to knowing where to pay attention, how to interpret that information, and then how to make the decision, which is the biggest issue. The biggest component of that whole task, right, are the first 3 steps, and we eliminate it in training. And we wonder why people don't succeed. That's why.
So you're saying that not every domestic violence call is exactly the same?
Nope. But you do learn pieces and parts, right? We learn schema. And the thing of it is, how did we do it, right? Well, we got lucky through experience. And after about, I've said this before, I don't think most cops have a clue until about the 5 to 7 year mark.
I've heard that before, yeah.
You think you do, but until you've got enough experience, and again, it depends on a lot of factors. Until you've got enough experience, about the 5 to 7 year mark, you start understanding and reading people and those kind of things. I mean, it's so funny with some of the newer cops when people will tell the most convincing lie, and newer cops buy it hook, line, and sinker, and you see that emotional investment where oh, I'm gonna get justice for this victim, and I'm like, hold on a sec. That victim may actually be your suspect. You might want to get a full investigation going first, but that happens all the time, right? So we get experience on the job, and if we get lucky, we never got hurt or anything else. And it's like, yeah, but you have an opportunity with the technology that's available now to get lots of experience before you even go out there. And one of the things in that article that I wrote, I talked about that as kids, right? We didn't learn to play the game, and I'm gonna keep coming back to calling it the game.
Sure.
I'll make references, because if you look at a lot of sporting environments, a lot of sporting events are started as some type of simulation of conflict or war.
Mhm.
There's the competitive aspect to it, and those kind of things. But if you look at it from that perspective, we as kids, we didn't start with the mechanics of how to throw. We played bunch ball, right?
Mhm.
I mean, before that, we watched a game with our father, our brother, or whoever. We watched to get an overview of how this thing starts to play out. We understand there's two sides. We understand where the ball's positioned. If it's, we'll go with run with football or rugby or whatever you want. We start developing the patterns of understanding before we ever get into the mechanics, the specific mechanics. We don't do that with cops. We focus on the specific mechanics. Here's how you swing a baton, not when, right?
Mhm.
We don't focus on all the potentials of that and when not to, when to use a taser, when not to use a taser. We don't focus on any of that. We focus specifically on the mechanics. Draw, fire 2 rounds.
Mhm.
But that's not the game environment that we play in. We learn a different way when we grow up, but yet we expect cops to all of a sudden figure out a completely different format. And I've argued that's, with the technology that we have, that doesn't make any sense. We have video that you could literally use over and over again to start help developing you'll hear me talk about a schema. A schema is a mental blueprint, right? It's a reference that our brain has to understand the world around us. We
Sure.
we use schemas all the time. I explain when I teach the concept. I have a course that I do with Virtual on part of our advanced training certification course. It's an 8-hour day on simulated event training. And that's just not digital video, but that's all simulated. I teach for simunitions on the side. I have for about 12 years. But red man drills, force on force drills, whatever it is, any type of simulated event training. I talk about the science behind it.
Mhm.
And I want people to understand that, how we learn and those kind of things. But schema, the concept of a schema, we understand it or inherently do, because I'll use in a classroom, I'll point to somebody who's got a water bottle. It's,
Mhm.
Aquafina or whatever it is. I go, hey, what is that sitting in front of him? Well, it's a water bottle. And then I'll point to somebody else who's got a different one. Well, but what's that? What's a water bottle? Have you ever seen that before? No. How do you know it's a water bottle? Because you have a schema for what a
Mhm.
water bottle looks like. I don't need to see every single iteration out there. I start developing the mental blueprint. Why or how is because I get the exposure to it. Well, that's the exposure of, hey, let's watch video or simulation, right? So I get the exposure of these patterns of how to classify not only something as simple as an item, an object, a or a water bottle, but I can do the same thing with behavior.
Mhm.
When people start doing this, I develop a pattern in my brain that I start to recognize that is, somebody cutting an angle on me, somebody who's my favorite, right? When you knew people were lying, is you ask them a question and they turn around and would ask the same question back. Hey, what's your name? What's my name? You knew at that moment the next thing out of their mouth was a lie, right? Because they're
Mhm.
stalling. But you develop that. I had to develop it. You had to develop it on the job, but there's no reason we can do high amounts of experience because the technology that's available in digital video and in simulation, everything else, so that these officers are learning like we learn as kids to develop a general understanding of the game before we get into the specifics of lining up sight, suppress, and trigger.
Well,
And that's a pet peeve.
yeah, yeah. Well, let's get into Vertra specifically and what Vertra's doing to rectify that. What they're doing in their training simulation that may give police officers and other law enforcement professionals a little bit of a leg up, if you will,
Oh, absolutely.
or a better preparation for the job.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of simulation, is that I can provide let's break it easy. It's a stimulus.
Mhm.
I can provide a stimulus that you learn to read and understand. So first and foremost, you learn to pay attention to it. Then you learn to understand what it means and then how to respond to it. Well, inside simulation, I can provide that stimulus and I can provide iterations of it, meaning, so we use what's called a branching technology. So if I stick you in a simulator and I stick you in a scenario, I've got scenarios that have got 168 somewhat different permutations. So you think you know, but you don't. It may have started the same, but I can change it on you. But I really want you to understand something as simple as a weapons security pat, right? So an individual that you're dealing with does that typical weapon or drug security pat. They got something in their waistband, and they know it's there. They're worried that you know it's there. They know that that kind of game.
Yeah.
And
I
all of a
know that
sudden,
you know that I
right.
know. Yeah.
But subconsciously, they will stand in body positions to try to mask it, to hide it with an arm. And you'll see where, they'll do the security pat with the inside portion of their wrist or their forearm just as a check. Is it still there? Is it still hidden? Right. When we start learning those by exposure, all right, and I can do that inside of a simulator. I can do a target glance, right, with especially because of what we do with 4K. I can literally have the character do a target glance instead of looking directly at you. They look down at your weapon, and because it's 4K, you can see that. And those are all simple little things that would all resonate with us. But with most of us, at least, most cops have been around for a while. But there's a tons of different things that I can do to simulate that, to show individuals going for a weapon. Something as simple as how somebody draws a weapon that is in the small of their lower back. Those are important cues because we start picking up how the angle of the shoulder or the angle of the elbow, any type of inclination, those are critical. And there's a difference between how that plays out and somebody grabbing a wallet. The speed, the angle, the angles themselves are more extreme. All of those things we can learn through simulation, and those are all things that we build inside of our simulators, or simulation training, I guess I should say. And I'm benefited in that we're doing some really cool stuff with virtual reality headsets in that. So we've invested in what's called a volumetric capture studio. So instead of the robot CGI cartoony characters that everybody,
I want to see you as a cartoon. I want to see you as a cartoon in a simulation.
brother, here's the thing. We have a capture of me, but it's not a cartoon. It's me. This is how realistic our volumetric is. My mom, who's up there in years, I brought one of our headsets home, and it had my character that was captured in our studio on it, and I put her inside this simulation. So she sees me inside. I was literally wearing this horrible red affliction printed shirt that had this crazy pattern, and we wanted it specifically to see how the volumetric would do with that type of print. But I put it in, or put her inside the headset. I'm wearing a different shirt in real life, and I have her go through it, and I take it off, and all of a sudden she's kind of confused because she's like, wait a minute, you were just there and had a different shirt on. I go, no, I wasn't. What you're seeing is in the headset. It ain't me, brother. It's me. It looks like me. It doesn't look like CGI.
This has been part 1 of Stay Sharp Through Proper Training. Part 2 of our discussion with Lon Bartel will be aired next week on Public Safety Talk Radio. Public Safety Talk Radio is produced by the POCUA. The POCUA is a consortium of financial institutions serving law enforcement as well as other first responders and public safety professionals. To learn more about our association and to find one of our credit unions or service providers near you, go to www.policecreditunions.com. And always remember, if you aren't working with one of our POCUA credit unions, you're just banking with an institution that just so happens to serve first responders. As a public safety professional, you and your family deserve better. Find a POCUA credit union today.